So I am thrilled to celebrate his three daughters with tonight's SF Honors screening and welcome writer-director Azazel Jacobs and actors Elizabeth Olsen and Jovan Adepo up to the stage if they are on their way up here. And we have an award. Here they are, look at that. All right, this is for you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First off, huge thanks to SF Film, to Diane Wilsey, Todd, and Katie, Trina. Thank you so much. And really, this is wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth Olsen, Jovan Adepo. This has been a dream situation for me. So I hope you enjoy the film. I'll see you afterwards. And yeah, thanks. I'll see you soon.
Please join me in welcoming to the stage the writer, director, producer, and editor, Azazel Jacobs. Performer and executive producer, Elizabeth Olsen. And performer of the indelible Benji, Jovan Adepo. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, it's always got to be moments of, there's moments of levity within, but it's a heavy end. So to come in and start chatting right away feels like a bit of a responsibility. As I know that you wrote the script with the intention of casting Carrie Coon, Natasha Lyonne, and Elizabeth Olsen, and all three serve as executive producers on the film, which is amazing. But I read that when you first started, you weren't exactly sure where the story was going to end up. And obviously this was motivated by some of your personal experience at the time and ongoing. Could you share with the audience the genesis for this project?
Sure thing. Again, thank you for having us, and thank you so much for all being here. I should also just say that I wrote it for the three of them, and I also wrote it for Jovan Adepo as well. So it was really one of these things where at a certain point when I was writing, I really just saw all four of them and sent it straight to them directly. I moved back to New York City to be close to my parents and started to learn how to be a caretaker as best as I could. I found it very overwhelming and very strange and confusing, and at the same time, I very much understood that this is like the best case scenario, that we outlive our parents, and it felt I couldn't understand how this was natural. And so trying to make sense of it, writing each day, just writing random thoughts until I realized, oh, okay, these like different feelings that I'm feeling are actually different siblings all in the same family. And that motivated me to start writing it down and kind of take something that I love doing, filmmaking, and bring it to something that was so confusing and with no sense of, with something that you don't have control over.
And then at what point, knowing that you had like certain tones and pacings that you were working towards with these performers, did you realize you were going to have Jay O'Sullivan, who plays Victor, have his incredible moment at the end of the film, like that was how you were going to tie it all together?
Yeah.
Or Vincent, I'm sorry, did I say Victor?
So I wrote with, I think like 15 pages in, I was thinking of them. And then the rest of it, I had like very specific kind of sense of the type of people I was looking for, including the apartment. Like I wasn't writing for a specific apartment, but I knew that it was like a certain type of apartment. And so I've been working a long time with a casting director named Nicola Busto. And we just set off on that search, and she brought up Jay. So we sat down, and it just felt like everything about this film was really just kind of trusting instincts and just going like, okay, this totally feels right. I could feel his presence was so clear just when Jay and I just sat down for the first time, that it was like this person could make a really big impact in a short amount of time. Besides just being a wonderful actor.
Elizabeth, you've said in other interviews that you would have said yes to pretty much anything Aza put in front of you, that you were excited to work with him again. And that when you first read the script, you were caught by the opening because it's so theatrical with the, single shot and the monologues. and characters in separate frames. And I'm curious, what was it specifically about Christina that you immediately warmed to as a character? And what was it about this character, besides maybe her love of the Grateful Dead, that took a little bit more work to personify?
Well, I first want to say that I guess it's not that I found the language theatrical, it's that there was language in a film. And I think that was exciting. And that language had a point of view and it had its own rhythm and its own voice. And it is how we also communicate. We sometimes ramble for a really long time and interrupt ourselves. But it's not something we often see and that we get to use. And so I knew that that the script had its own language forward. Language just had its own, it was its own character. It was part of the score of the film in a way. And so I was excited about that. And then with Christina, I gravitate towards very unlikable people usually. And so it was funny when because Ozza knows me pretty well over the last 5 or so years. And so it was interesting for me to then think about actually the women on camera that I've loved watching my whole life. And those are women like Diane Weiss and Diane Keaton and Carol Kane. And like all those women are like such specific New York characters to me. And they also have like such a kindness to them. And so there's something, for the first time, I actually felt like maybe I could try and find a freedom in that kind of a character, whereas usually I'm trying to defend or advocate for someone who thinks very differently from the average person that I know. And so I think that's what was exciting for me with Christina, was leaning into that in a way.
Thank you. Jovan, Carrie Coon said something really lovely about how the film dignifies the audience without giving too much of a backstory, that you don't need the history to relate to what's happening on screen. And I feel like that's particularly true with your character, Benji. We don't get to spend a lot of time with you, and you make a meal out of your moment. And you're someone that we got to know the least in this story. And so I'm just curious, like, how did you prepare for this role, especially as someone that was coming into a shoot where there was 3 very strong leads? And I'm specifically interested in the choices you made about the physicality of the character and how much frustration to let shine through on behalf of Rachel.
Initially, well, I was going to do the project anyway because I wanted a chance to work with Azza and Lizzie again, who I'd worked with before on a TV show, but also with Carrie, and a chance to get to work with Natasha Leon as well because she's brilliant. But I felt like I could really relate to Benji because before I started acting, and I've said this before I started acting, I worked in a senior home in Beverly Hills, and a lot of the residents at this facility were older, obviously, and they were suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever. And I ended up having like what felt like 50 grandparents. And these were people that knew that I was a struggling actor at the time, and I was going on auditions, and they would always be like, "You shouldn't be here, Jovan. You should be there on those moving pictures." You know, like just really advocating for me to be successful, so I could relate to loving an older person that wasn't a part of my family, but I still loved them the same. So I was excited to get a chance to play Benji because he doesn't have the license to pick a fight in the decision making with Vincent because that's not his father, but he does feel a connection to Vincent, and he also just really cares about Rachel. So as far as his physicality, I remember when we initially started blocking it, Benji was supposed to be, I think, Ozzy, you can correct me if I'm remembering different. He was supposed to be a bit more intoxicated than he was, a bit more belligerent and angry and perhaps a bit more aggressive. Personally, I liked the choice of us softening it because I just didn't want to feel like too aggressive as a bigger guy in a room with these 3 women. Anyway, I didn't say that, but it worked in my favor because he wanted it to be softer anyway. But I think the reasoning for it really made sense because this was about making sure that there was clarity about why what this dynamic that they have isn't working. And I think a lot of times in communicating, if you go in too aggressive, the lines of communication are cut off. If I call you an asshole and I say I'm going to give you 10 reasons why, reason 1, you're not going to listen. But if you're trying to just really make a connection and an understanding, that's where I think Benji meant to come from. He wasn't successful because he started to get upset at the end anyway. But his intent, at least we tried to play it initially, that he was softer and wanted to show them that I have license to be in this room and in this dining room and on this couch because I've spent time here that perhaps you guys haven't spent. So that was, I said all that to say that was a note that Ozzy made, and then I adjusted to it.
But it was success. I mean, she does hear you about the apples. You know, like it's like you can't tell that she's hearing you, but then you realize that it did land.
I think also you're kind of our conduit for the frustration we're all feeling at that point. So you're saying what like we want, and you could have been more angry, I think. So it was really interesting the choices, how still you are in that scene. So thank you. I'd love to talk a little bit about the rehearsal process. Jovan, you just referenced that you all know each other from your work for with Sorry for Your Loss. My understanding is that Carrie, Natasha, and Elizabeth showed up off book, that you shot sequentially on film in like 3 weeks, which sounds really easy. And in the script, you know, and in such a small space, there's nowhere really to hide. Like everybody has to be ready to go. But I am really curious, like, how did you rehearse? How did you prepare? And this is a question for all of you.
I mean, we had about 3 days or so to have a rehearsal period, which also includes camera tests and fittings and things like that. So it wasn't that whole time wasn't committed to us sitting around and working through the script rhythmically. But we did go through table reads, and then we had questions about timelines, basic things, right, that are kind of boring. But for most people, but I do think what that time lent for the three of us with Aza was creating our own language of how we were going to communicate with each other, how we were going to shoot, to understand the space, to walk through the space, and then when it comes to preparation, if Carrie and Natasha were here, they'd all have different things to say. Carrie is a mother of two and was coming off of a totally other another project immediately. Natasha was also coming off of another project where she was also a producer and a writer and a director. And I came from like 3 months of getting to do prep work on this, so it's very different for all of us. And so for the prep, I think it just depends on how much time you're given and what you're able to muster. But it was one of those jobs where we all knew what we were signing up for. It was a very small budget film, and Ozzy knew exactly what he needed to get what he needed. We knew that we were going to shoot in order because that was a goal of his. We knew we were going to shoot on film, and so we all just kind of showed up every day, really present and prepared. And the thing with shooting in order is you get to let it actually indicate your next actions, and we didn't have to make things up. And so that was a privilege that none of us had ever actually had before in film.
I'd say the other thing too was that it was the first time the three of them were meeting each other, and they were fans of each other. And I think that was just I loved watching them meet for the first time and seeing how they were just immediately, I could see a connection, but also an inspiration of each other. And there was like a desire to be with each other and to learn from each other.
Like disgustingly obsessed with one.
Yeah, I heard that there was some like maybe like familial touching. Like that sounds really bad, but like just that you guys were immediately like pawing each other's hair and like in each other's spaces.
Aza couldn't like get us to go to like, okay, we're ready, and we'd be like in a clump on the floor, like intertwined limbs, playing the New York Times spelling bee. That's what we did every day.
I found pictures that I took in the hallway, like where I was about to knock on the door, and then I just saw all these legs twined in. And so I found pictures the other day of just like the slice, and I'm like, who is it? It's like this a big massive. But yeah, they were just like
I mean, a bunch of women in one movie doesn't always get to happen.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just that. It was also to be the type of person who wants to do this job, not knowing if anyone would ever see it. Genuinely, like the fact that we got to be here is such a huge privilege to us. We didn't make this with, results in our mind. We made this because of a process that we had all missed. And that's where it came from, and wanting to support a filmmaker whom we love as a person and a creative.
And there was, yeah.
Wow, thank you.
There was also like never a question of you being there, like any of the actors being for the other person, whether they're off screen or not, or even if they could wrap and leave early, they just stayed to make sure that they were there to be the other person that they're speaking to. It was like, that wasn't like, sometimes it feels like a big ask or like a big sacrifice. In this case, it just happened all the time. So people weren't, just, they were there together even if they weren't sharing a frame together, you know.
Lovely. Jovan, since you weren't able to be part of the puppy pile on the floor, how did you prepare for coming into a space, especially since you were shooting sequentially? And so there was already, I'm assuming, definitive energy and tone on set.
It was intimidating. And I was,
You knew
and
2/3 of us, though.
yeah, but it was still a bit jarring because when I got there, you guys were it felt like in character that it was a bit jarring to see, like, I mean, this is still my friend Lizzie. I've known her for years, and Carrie is like my big sister, but I'm looking at his three daughters right now. So, but it was like Lizzie saying, like, I didn't want to come in and be a weak link because they've had this rehearsal time, they've had this time to bond. So I wasn't gonna show up and not know my lines. Now, Carrie is very, very aggressive with like making sure
Word
everybody's
perfect.
word perfect.
And we wanted to be word perfect. because
Absolutely.
It was very specific writing.
Absolutely.
And punctuation perfect.
But I was not, totally aware about Carrie being that way. So when I came on, you
All of
remember
us,
this?
All of us. All of
and
us.
I remember doing like the first like run through of the big, clashing scene, and I missed like a if and or but or something, and Carrie was like, "Well," and then it was kind of like a quiet actress power, like, "Hey, we're perfect here." And then and this is the first time I'm saying this, but the flow of the
No, that's
Q
what
and A,
happened.
and I
We're
freaked
perfect on
out.
set.
I freaked out, and Lizzie and Carrie, because
We're
that
like,
two
"Come
thirds.
into our 2-bedroom apartment."
We go to their rehearsal space, and they're like, we're here for you and we can help you. And for whatever reason, that made me freak out more. And I was like, what is this? An intervention? I know how to act. Like, it was just a weird, but I could only do that because I was comfortable with them. And so we like powwowed it out, and Carrie was like, hey, Jovan, you know what to do. Get it together. And I was like, I'm gonna go to my dressing room. And then I ran the lines, and then by the time it was time to do it, it worked out. But I'm saying, it was intimidating. But that's the type of stuff that you want, though. That's the work that you want. You want those challenges because I think it makes you a better performer. And I know that what I'm walking into with these three actresses, they're brilliant. So I wanted to come in and do my part as well.
Thank you. Aza, this is great. And I have so many more questions actually about rehearsal process, but Aza, I kind of want to go back. You had said something about, specifically about like the apartment, and I want to talk about the production design and the soundscape in this film, because you don't see much of the city, but it is so viscerally a New York City apartment. And I maybe that's just because I lived in New York City. I don't know if it felt that way for other people, but like for me, it was very obviously a New York City apartment. And like with the lighting and the small spaces and the sounds that we hear, the equipment from Vincent's room and Christina's singing, and noises, in other words. And then what we see in the apartment is also so specific and intentional. Like we never see Vincent's room, despite the close quarters. The characters are often framed alone. Isolation is messaged as well as seen. So can you talk to us about like what it was like to prepare with your team the design of the apartment and how you wanted to lens the film?
Sure. I could say that growing up in New York City, that there was many apartments that I would visit that you could feel families' history. You could feel them in the walls. You could feel the fights and the laughter and just the sense of the people that embody the room. Like, even though they are apartments and there could be many, many units of them, there was something very, very distinct about them. And that allowed me, once I was chasing that, it made me reach out to many kids that I grew up with just to find out if they were still in their apartment, or if their parents were in their apartments, or just what it was. And ultimately, I was looking for that not only that history, but also a character that we could kind of understand and explore in the same way that the characters, like the sisters and the family, are. It was, this thing that he was just saying about like how the rehearsal was, and that having those walls there, these things that we think of as limitations, were so important because it forced a closeness. Like, there was no place really for like with this story that you just said, like you couldn't hide from them, like they're just right there, which is not like that on a soundstage. You know, you can go and then so having something that forced you in to force and confront each other. I find like when I think about this film and I think about the fights that happen in this apartment, I think that that actually is like a very important part of grieving. Like I don't think I think that's a healthy thing. I know that it's like painful, but I do think that means like we're being alive together. And so having solid walls, having real light, being on the 6th floor, feeling New York City all the time, me walking from the place that I live to set each day, walking back, it allowed me to just feel lives and I could feel the neighbors. We were very conscious of the neighbors while we're shooting. Um, and we try to coexist in a place like we weren't going to shoot throughout the night. And then just with Sam Levy and I, really just trying to figure out, okay, how we know that there's like this theatrical side to this, but since I'm like I'm going after something specific with time. How could we isolate frames? How could we do this thing? Like this whole opening is something. The way that the sisters reveal themselves is not anything you could do on a stage. If you saw all three of them at the same moment on the first scene, it's a very different thing than the introduction, which is like, yeah, they're sharing the same space, like the same room, but they're completely in separate spaces. They're not connected in that way.
Which is also written into the script.
Yeah.
How he was going to shoot this was written into the script, not knowing who Katie was speaking to in that first scene, where she even was. We were told by Ozza in the direction that where our perspective was. And so it was incredibly specific getting to read it that way as well. And it made it clear how he was isolating all the characters, like you were saying, with the space itself.
Yeah, and I realized like there's this thing where we go, oh, can we fill up a frame with as much information as possible? And that seems like something that you're supposed to do, and especially like sometimes we're working with cinematographers, and you're trying to make things look beautiful. In this case, I really wanted to go, okay, what could we be offered if we don't get that? Like that opening up with Katie against a white wall, we have no idea where she is. It could be, and especially because of the delivery, it really could be just an audition tape, right? And like I wanted that sense of going, okay, this feels real but not real, and then bit by bit, we really feel that, oh, there's cement in these walls, and that there's something actually very beyond just the theatrical. It's like there's something very, very grounded ultimately that gets revealed.
I mean, it's obviously it's a heavy film and it deals so much with grief, and you were going through a process in real time in your life as well of like dealing with aging in this chapter of your life. But gosh, it sounds like a dream scenario, like to have been able to walk and to be able to be so collaborative and to have so much control over the product that you were trying to create.
Yeah, this is a dream that continues, like to right this second. You know, this is one of those things where you just go like, I'm not going to second guess. I'm going to go straight to these incredible actors, and I'm just going to believe that they're going to respond, and then we're going to figure out when we can shoot it. And we just held on together. I went straight first and foremost to them because I wanted to start as a team, as fellow filmmakers. I wanted everything to begin and end in this way that was like very, very transparent. And there's, I could say that there's a lot of lessons that I've learned from making this film, but you don't know if they can ever apply to anything else again. It felt like I really needed to tell this story. And so there was some part of it which was like, let me reach out to these people that I respect and I love and I care about, and I'm asking them, could you help me out during this period of my life?
Well, and they rose to the occasion, it seems like, very much so. So the film premiered at Toronto last year, and then now you have been doing theatrical and you've been on the road. You were in London, New York, LA, and now here, sharing the film with audiences before it comes out this Friday. Tell all your friends it's on Netflix. And I'm just curious, I think maybe I can't remember if it was with The Lovers or with Mama's Man, but you talked a little bit about how it can be quite difficult to like hand a film over to an audience after you've worked so hard on it. And I'm curious for all three of you, as you've been talking so much about the film, and everyone identifies with the characters differently and the process of grieving differently. What has surprised you, perhaps, about audience reactions and how the film has been taken over into the space that it will now continue to exist?
Yeah, I have a hard time releasing films as well, because I think it's like before they're released, they're your favorite thing that you've done because they're still yours. And this film is because of Oz's experience and ethos. This film was taken care of in such a small, beautiful way, that the fact that we have the opportunity with it right now that we do, and the love that's been put into it because of Netflix, which, to me at one point in my life, I would be confused by that. But I can't imagine for a better home for it right now. They've given us a 35 millimeter print that we're screening in multiple cities. We are able to have a theatrical release, which most films actually don't get, regardless of who acquires them. So releasing this has actually felt like what I want to be almost the standard of why independent films should be financed by people taking risks. And so it's been really nice to kind of go, oh, thanks. I think so too. So it kind of it feels good to talk about it. It feels good to travel and do Q&As and see people who have just seen it. I always think it's a little weird to like watch a movie and then continue to talk about it with, in a Q&A perspective as an audience viewer myself, but I've been there, and so I feel like it's a real privilege for us to get to talk about how we put this together and how we made it, and yeah, it continues to be the gift that keeps on giving. That Ozza said, like it's we had no expectations, and so this film's release has been really special, and also a reminder that I think audiences that show up for things, that this is something that connects with them, and I think. We keep trying to guess as an industry what people want to go see, and so we go back to things that are repeating trends, and it doesn't actually work. And so it's nice to be a part of something that feels like hopefully starting a part of a history of trends that have surprised people, I guess.
Yeah, there's so much of that I want to second. I mean, I would say that I finished the film right before premiering a year ago in Toronto, and it happened to be during a strike, the SAG strike, and so I was out there just with my wife, and who's a producer, with the other producers as well, and that felt very odd because it felt like our film. That screening, I sat in the very first screening. I sat in the very, very back with Diaz, my wife, and just like we hit the silent part in the film, and I heard a sound. And I was like, "What is that sound?" And then it was like I heard it, and I was like, "Is that crying?" Like, and suddenly I was like, this feeling of feeling completely alone during this journey suddenly just went away. Like I felt like, oh, there's this collective thing where I felt much less lonely. And it was an amazing thing. And I just remember texting them, trying to explain this thing. And then Netflix has just been like, they got it, they connected with it, and we made a decision together. We're gonna release it a year later, so where we are now. And so it allowed us to be very like methodic about how we're gonna do this in the most wonderful ways. But the whole time I was thinking, like, will this film work a year later? And just that's been like such a pleasure to find that it's still connecting with people that stayed alive. So different than those films that you mentioned, which I do feel like are still walking, but I was like, come on, one more step. Yeah. This one just ran.
It's interesting. We've talked about a little bit about the grief element and about how that can be isolating, but also unifying. But Jovan, you said something interesting about not being part of like the blood family, about being part of maybe the chosen family. And I think that that's also so interesting in the fact that all of these characters are wrestling with the fact that like who they think they are is not necessarily how they're viewed by others around them, including boyfriends and others in the space. And that allows for a lot of humor in the film as well, which is really interesting. And I was just curious, like, did either of you, when you were doing your performance, like, were you ever wrestling with the fact of like, oh, how do I portray who I think this person is versus who the other performers in the room are reflecting back to me what they think this character is?
That might be a question for you, but I feel like I had a strong sense of who I thought Benji was based off of my conversation with Aza and my experience dealing with seniors in my previous job. But I try not to spend too much time thinking about how I'm being received by the other actor. I think that's just a part of they're doing their work with their complete character, and I'm doing mine. I don't know, Lizzie. Is that something?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just focusing on not so much the other actors, but their characters, I guess. Is that maybe I'm misunderstanding the question?
No, it's just so interesting. It's like something we haven't been able to talk about yet, which is about like the bonds and the tie, and that is so much a part of this that I think beyond isolation and grief is also what people resonate with, like your chosen family.
Oh, that's what. Sorry. I
versus-
thought you meant the actors themselves judging me.
No, sorry. What a question. How did you feel about Carrie and Natasha judging you on set?
That's what I thought you were talking about. And I was like, I don't think they're judging me. Maybe they are. Doesn't matter. I'll scratch it out. Yeah, I think that's actually the thing that resonates most is the performance we play for our families. It's like we're trapped. we build these family nucleuses of our own, and we get older, and we become the people we are in our chosen family and with our friends, and then you go home and you're like, oh gosh, why am I acting like this? This is not who I am. And so I do think that's where everyone is in this film. And gosh, how annoying is that, you know? And it really comes out when we're taking care of people. And it really comes out in moments of death like this. It's really challenging. And you either get to continue to do the performance or you have a massive disruption, which is incredibly painful, but ultimately everyone's better for it.
Thank you for sharing and saving me. Apparently, I was not asking if you were judging each other on set. We are out of time. I could talk to you all night about your craft and your performance, but this is such a beautiful film. Thank you so much for all the care and the thought you put in it. I think this is the last time you're talking to an audience before it comes out. I don't know.
Before it comes out, yeah.
Yeah, this is the last time they're talking to an audience before it comes out on the platform on Friday. So thank you so much for sharing your beautiful
Thank you for having us.
Jovan Adepo, Elizabeth Olsen, and Azazel Jacobs. Thank you for coming to His Three Daughters.